Welcome to our deep dive today into the Black Dahlia.
Ooh,
I know what you're thinking.
yeah.
You're thinking Black Dahlia, heard it, seen it, done it.
Right.
But trust me on this.
Okay.
We're going to go beyond those headlines.
Right.
We're going to peel back the layers of this case like an onion because every layer gets more and more intriguing.
I'm ready.
We've got FBI files, recent investigations,
Wow.
all sorts of stuff that we're going to use to unpack this.
Let's get into it.
Enduring mystery.
What I find so fascinating about this case is it's not just a brutal murder. It's a reflection of the times, you know?
Yeah.
It's post-war America. It's anxieties.
Mm.
It's all these undercurrents brought to the surface by this horrific event.
That's a great point because it's like it holds up a mirror to society,
Yeah.
revealing more than just the crime.
Right.
So let's start with Elizabeth Short,
Okay.
the woman behind the Black Dahlia. What do we actually know about her life?
Well, she was born in 1924 and had a kind of, I guess you could call it, nomadic early life. Moving from Boston to Florida, eventually ending up in California to be with her father.
With her dad.
What's interesting is this whole image of her as an aspiring actress,
Oh, yeah.
a Hollywood hopeful, that might not actually be entirely accurate.
Right.
There's no concrete evidence
Yeah.
that she was pursuing acting.
Huh. So already we're seeing how legend kind of overtakes reality.
Right.
But how did that name come about? Black Dahlia.
Yeah.
It's so dramatic.
Well, the exact origin is still debated. Some believe it was a play on the film,
Okay.
The Blue Dahlia, which came out around that time,
Right.
combined with her, I guess, rumored preference for black clothing.
Mm.
But honestly, it seems more likely the name was actually coined by the press.
Ah, the press.
Less than subtle.
I think we're going to have to dedicate some time to that whole tangled web.
For sure.
But let's get to the chilling facts of the case. January 15th, 1947. Vacant lot. Limert Park. Body of Elizabeth Short is discovered. It's a scene that's been described in countless books and films.
Absolutely.
But the reality, I imagine, was far more gruesome.
It wasn't just about the brutality. It was the deliberate staging, the precision of the cuts. Almost surgical.
Right.
It's called a hemicorporectomy.
Hemicorporectomy.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly specialized. I mean, the skill and knowledge it would take to do something like that.
Exactly. And that's what struck investigators right away.
Mm.
The way her body was drained of blood, cleaned, and posed.
Right.
It all points to a level of premeditation. That's, yeah, very chilling.
Like the killer was following a script, some gruesome performance meant to shock and horrify.
Yeah.
But surely there had to be clues at the scene, right?
Yeah.
Fingerprints, footprints, anything?
Well, there were some. There was a heel print,
Okay.
cement sack,
Mm-hmm.
with watery blood,
Mm-hmm.
indicating an attempted cleanup.
Mm-hmm.
But none of those initial leads panned out. The heel print didn't match any suspects, and the blood, well, that just added to the mystery.
So what about the autopsy? Did that shed any light on how Elizabeth Short died?
Well, the autopsy, done the day after they found her body,
Mm-hmm.
confirmed the cause of death was hemorrhaging and shock from blows to the head. But it also revealed a really disturbing detail.
Okay.
The lack of bruising around the incisions suggested she was already dead
Oh, what?
when the bisection happened.
So she was murdered and then mutilated. This just adds another layer of horror to this whole thing. And the facial mutilations, the Glasgow smile.
Right.
I remember reading, that's a very specific type of cut
Yeah.
associated with organized crime.
That's right, and it's a detail that's fueled endless speculation about the killer's identity and their potential motives.
Yeah.
Was it a message, a vendetta, or just a sadistic act? We can't say for sure, but it speaks volumes about the darkness of this case.
It's a chilling thought. But before we get too caught up in all that, let's stick with the investigation for now. What happened next? Did the LAPD have any solid leads?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated.
Okay.
Because immediately after they found Elizabeth Short's body, the media went into overdrive.
Oh, I bet.
The headlines were sensational, lots of details were exaggerated or completely fabricated.
Hmm.
It was a frenzy, and in many ways, it hindered the investigation.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, the Los Angeles Examiner reporters, they were desperate for a scoop, so they contacted Elizabeth's mother, pretending that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest.
Oh, my God.
They got all her personal details and even persuaded her to come to Los Angeles, knowing full well that Elizabeth was dead.
That's just appalling. Exploiting a grieving mother like that for a story really shows how the pursuit of sensationalism trumps basic human decency.
It's a dark side of journalism.
Hmm.
And in this case, it had a real impact on the investigation. With so much misinformation going around, it became difficult to separate fact from fiction.
Wow. So amidst this media storm, what was the LAPD actually doing to try and solve the case?
Well, they interviewed over 150 suspects in the initial stages of the investigation. But there was a major hurdle,
Okay.
a missing week,
A missing week.
between January 9th, when she was last seen,
Yeah.
and January 15th, when her body was found. These missing days
Oh, wow.
became a black hole, making it almost impossible to piece together her movements or figure out who she might have been with.
A missing week. It's like this gaping hole in the story.
Right.
It must have made their job 100 times harder.
It did.
But surely they had some people of interest, right?
Well, two names came up
Okay.
repeatedly in those early stages. Robert Manley, last known person to see her alive, and Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner and an acquaintance of Elizabeth.
Okay.
Manley was cleared by a polygraph. But Hansen's connection was a little bit more complicated.
Okay, in what way?
His name and address were found, embossed on an address book that was sent to the police, along with a few other personal items that they think belonged to Elizabeth.
Wait, the killer sent an address book to the police? That's incredibly brazen.
It was
Almost like he wanted to taunt them, make sure they knew he was in control.
exactly. And it wasn't just the address book.
Okay.
He sent a series of bizarre letters to the newspapers, cut and pasted from news clippings,
Wow.
and cleaned with gasoline, just like Elizabeth Short's body. These letters claimed responsibility, taunted the police, even promised to surrender.
Did he surrender?
He never did.
It's like some twisted game, a macabre performance, with the whole city as the stage.
Right.
But they must have gotten fingerprints from those letters, right?
There are partials, but they were compromised in transit, rendered useless by the very people who were supposed to be protecting them.
It's like every step forward, 2 steps back.
It was.
This is already incredibly complex, and we've only just scratched the surface.
And it gets even more complex when we consider all the other leads, whispers of connections to unsolved crimes. The possibility that the Black Dahlia wasn't an isolated incident.
Hold on, are you saying there might be a connection between the Black Dahlia case and other unsolved murders?
It's a thought that haunted investigators. From the very beginning,
Okay.
there were similarities, echoes of the Black Dahlia murder in other cases, other victims, other cities, all linked by the same brutality, the same chilling precision.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting.
Sure.
We're talking about a potential serial killer operating across state lines, responsible for multiple murders. This changes everything. We need to unpack these potential connections,
Absolutely.
see if there's any substance to these theories.
And that's exactly what we'll do in the next part of our deep dive. Get ready, because we're about to enter a labyrinth of possibilities, a web of connections that might lead us closer to the truth, or perhaps further into the heart of the mystery.
Okay, I'm officially hooked. Last time we left off with the possibility of connections to other unsolved crimes.
Right.
This feels like a whole other level of complexity in the Black Dahlia case.
It definitely adds another layer to this already intricate puzzle. One of the cases that drew early attention was the Cleveland torso murders.
Oh,
The level of brutality, the dismemberment. There were definite parallels to the Black Dahlia case.
but Cleveland's pretty far from Los Angeles, right? Was there any evidence to suggest a direct link?
Not definitively.
Mm-hmm.
The geographical distance was a significant factor.
Yeah.
And the Cleveland torso murders took place years earlier.
Right.
And while the killer's methods shared some similarities, there were enough differences to raise doubts about a direct connection.
So a chilling parallel, but perhaps not directly related.
Right.
What about other cases? Were there any that seemed more closely linked to the Black Dahlia murder?
There was some interest in the Chicago lipstick murders, particularly because the killer in that case also sent taunting notes to the police.
Okay. Yeah.
Some handwriting analysts even pointed out similarities between those notes and the ones sent in the Black Dahlia case.
Interesting. So could the Black Dahlia killer have been active in Chicago before moving to Los Angeles? Did the investigators ever look into that?
They did. But here's where it gets complicated. William Aarons was convicted of the lipstick murders, but he maintained his innocence until he died in 2012.
Wow.
This adds a whole other layer of uncertainty.
Yay.
If Aarons was truly innocent, then the real lipstick killer was still out there, potentially linked to the Black Dahlia case.
Wow. So we've got a potential serial killer, cryptic notes, and now a wrongful conviction. This is getting more tangled by the minute.
And we haven't even touched on the lone woman murders. That plagued Los Angeles in the 1940s.
Oh, right.
Some criminologists believe there's a possibility that the Black Dahlia murder was part of this larger pattern of violence targeting women.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the lack of concrete evidence makes it difficult to say for certain.
So many potential connections, so many threads leading off in different directions. It's no wonder this case has become such a breeding ground for theories.
Right.
But let's shift gears for a moment.
Okay.
We talked earlier about the media frenzy surrounding the case. Can you elaborate on how that impacted the investigation and perhaps the way Elizabeth Short was perceived?
The media's influence in the Black Dahlia case cannot be overstated. They were relentless, pushing the boundaries of decency in their pursuit of sensational stories. They painted Elizabeth Short as a Hollywood hopeful,
Right.
a femme fatale, even though there was little evidence to support those narratives.
It's a classic example of how the media can shape public perception, creating a story that often overshadows the reality.
Exactly.
Did this media attention ever lead investigators down the wrong path?
Absolutely. The constant stream of tips from the public, many of them fueled by the media's portrayal of Elizabeth Short, overwhelmed the LAPD. They were chasing shadows, trying to sort through a mountain of misinformation to find a grain of truth.
It must have been incredibly frustrating for the investigators.
It was. Knowing that the killer was out there, potentially watching the media circuits unfold,
Right.
feeling like they were constantly one step behind.
Yeah.
That frustration likely played a role in some of the investigative missteps. There were allegations of evidence mishandling, of witnesses being coerced, of rivalries between different law enforcement agencies, the pressure to solve the case, to satisfy the public's hunger for answers, created an atmosphere of chaos, and in some cases compromised the integrity of the investigation.
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of trial by media. And in this case, it seems like Elizabeth Short, the victim, became a symbol, an object of fascination, rather than a real person with a story to tell. It's a sad truth that often gets lost in the midst of these high-profile cases.
It is. And I think that's one of the most important things to remember. When we revisit cases like this, we need to be mindful of the victims, their families, the real human lives that were impacted by these tragedies.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in the intrigue, the mystery. But it's crucial to remember that at the heart of it all, there was a young woman who lost her life in a horrific way.
Well said. And I think it's important for us to be mindful of that as we delve further into the suspects, the theories, and the enduring legacy of the Black Dahlia case. But before we move on, I'm curious about something.
Okay.
We've talked about potential connections to other crimes.
Right.
But what about the investigation itself? Did the LAPD ever zero in on any specific individuals who seemed particularly suspicious?
There were several individuals who caught the attention of investigators, each with their own set of circumstances and potential motives.
Yeah.
One of the most prominent figures linked to the case was George Hodel,
George Hodel.
a physician with a dark past.
A physician. I remember reading about that. Wasn't there something about his son, a former LAPD detective, accusing him of the crime years later?
That's right. Steve Hodel, George's son, became convinced of his father's guilt after uncovering a series of seemingly incriminating details.
Okay.
George Hodel had medical training, which linked him to the precision of Elizabeth Short's mutilation.
That's a chilling connection. A doctor with the knowledge and skill to perform such a gruesome act? Did Steve Hodel present any other evidence to support his claims?
He did. He pointed to similarities between his father's handwriting and the handwriting in the Black Dahlia Avenger letters. He also claimed that there were cryptic entries in his father's personal diaries
Wow.
that seemed to allude to the crime.
So, a father with a hidden past, a son determined to uncover the truth, and a series of tantalizing clues. It's like something out of a psychological thriller.
It really is.
Did the LAPD ever take Steve Hodel's accusations seriously?
They did. In fact, there were already suspicions surrounding George Hodel. Dating back to the original investigation, he was a known associate of Man Ray, a famous surrealist artist who had photographed Elizabeth Short before her death.
Oh, wow.
And then there was the bombshell revelation from the 1949 grand jury investigation.
Wait, what was that? What did they uncover in 1949?
Transcripts from wiretaps placed at George Hodel's home
Okay.
captured him saying something along the lines of, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now."
Whoa. That's pretty incriminating. Did the LAPD ever confront Hodel about those recordings?
They investigated, but the case never solidified. George Hodel fled the country, living in the Philippines for decades, effectively escaping any potential prosecution.
Wow.
The whole situation added fuel to the fire, casting a long shadow of suspicion over George Hodel. and leaving many to wonder if he truly was the Black Dahlia killer.
So we've got a potential suspect with medical training, a suspicious past, and a chillingly incriminating statement captured on tape. It seems like a pretty strong case, but I imagine there were other suspects.
If there were other theories that the LAPD explored.
This is the Black Dahlia case we're talking about.
Right? It's a case that's attracted more than its fair share of theories and potential suspects over the years.
Well, I'm eager to dive into those other leads, see if any of them hold more weight than the George Hodel theory. We've got the media frenzy, the potential connections to other unsolved crimes, and now a prime suspect who seemed to vanish into thin air. This is getting more fascinating by the minute.
And it gets even more intriguing when we start to delve into the psychological aspects of the case. The brutality, the staging, the meticulous nature of the crime. It all points to a very specific type of killer, one with a particular set of motivations
Right.
and a chillingly distorted view of the world.
You're right. We've touched on the psychology of the killer briefly, but we haven't really explored it in depth. I'm curious to hear what experts have to say about the potential profile of someone who could commit such a horrific act.
That's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll be entering the mind of the Black Dahlia killer, analyzing the evidence, and attempting to construct a psychological profile that might shed light on this enduring mystery.
All right, we've spent the last two parts wading through all the facts, the rumors, the suspects, the whole tangled web of the Black Dahlia case.
Yeah, we have.
Now it's time to get into the really unsettling stuff, the mind of the killer.
It's a dark path, but a necessary one, if we really want to understand why this crime happened, why it was carried out with such brutality and precision. We need to try to understand the psychology.
I'm ready, but I have a feeling this is going to be the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night. Where do we even begin with something like this? How do you start to build a profile of someone capable of such an act?
Well, we start with the evidence. The crime scene, the autopsy report, the letters.
Right.
All of these pieces offer clues, not just about who the killer might be, but how he thinks, how he views the world.
Okay, so let's break it down. What specific aspects of the crime point towards particular psychological traits?
The sheer brutality is our first clue. The level of violence inflicted on Elizabeth Short, the posing of the body, the meticulous bisection, it all speaks to a deep-seated rage, a need to not only to kill, but to dehumanize the victim.
It's like the killer wasn't just taking a life, he was trying to erase Elizabeth Short's humanity, to turn her into an object.
Exactly. And the fact that the bisection was likely performed post-mortem, that adds another layer to the psychological puzzle. It suggests a comfort with death and dismemberment that goes way beyond the typical criminal.
It's almost as though the killer was relishing the act, taking his time to defile the body. It's truly disturbing. It makes me think of those cases you hear about, where the killer keeps trophies, souvenirs of their crimes.
That's a very astute observation. The act of posing the body, of creating a specific tableau that can be seen as a form of trophy taking. It's a way for the killer to maintain control, to prolong the experience, to relive the crime in his own twisted way.
Okay, now that you mention it, the posing of the body is incredibly creepy. It's like the killer was staging a scene, putting on a show for whoever might find her.
And don't forget about the Glasgow smile. This particular type of facial mutilation, it's not just about inflicting pain. It's about sending a message,
Okay.
creating a visual meant to shock and terrify.
We talked earlier about how the Glasgow smile is often associated with organized crime. Do you think that points to a connection with the mob?
It's certainly a possibility, but it's important to remember that symbolism can be fluid. The killer might have chosen this specific mutilation for other reasons.
Right.
Maybe he was trying to emulate something he'd seen in a movie, a book, or even another crime.
That's true. We've already seen how the media played a role in shaping this whole narrative.
Right. It's possible the killer himself was influenced by the media,
Yeah.
by the images and stories circulating at the time.
And then, of course, there are the letters.
Right, the
The cut and paste messages, the taunts, the promises of a surrender that never came. What do those tell us about the killer's mental state?
The letters reveal a desire for recognition, a need to be seen as intelligent, cunning, even superior to the police. There's definitely an element of narcissism, a belief that he's playing a game and that he's destined to win.
It's like he wanted to be famous. He wanted his name associated with this horrific crime. Do you think that's a common trait among serial killers?
It's not uncommon. A lot of serial killers crave notoriety. They want their crimes to be remembered, to be studied,
Right.
to make them infamous.
But it's not just about fame, is it? There's something darker at play.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
need for control, a desire to inflict fear, to manipulate not just the victims, but the entire city.
You're absolutely right. The letters, the staging, it's
Hmm.
all about power. The killer is asserting his dominance, showing the world that he's in control,
Right.
that he can do whatever he wants, and no one can stop him.
It's a terrifying thought and one that I'm sure kept people on edge for a very long time. But let's shift gears for a second.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the killer. But what about the investigators? I can't even imagine what it must have been like working on a case like this, to be constantly confronted with such brutality and darkness.
It takes a toll, there's no doubt about that. Imagine facing those horrific details day in and day out. The pressure to find answers, the constant dead ends. It can be soul-crushing work.
And the fact that they never caught the killer, that must have added another layer of frustration, of guilt even.
Absolutely. To know that someone capable of such an act was still out there,
Right.
potentially harming others. That's a burden a lot of investigators carry long after a case goes cold.
It makes you wonder about the lasting impact of a case like this, not just on the investigators, but on the city itself. Did the Black Dahlia murder change Los Angeles?
I think it did, in subtle but profound ways.
How so?
It shattered the illusion of safety. The idea that Hollywood was all glitz and glamour, it revealed a darkness lurking beneath the surface. A reminder that even in the brightest of places, evil can find a foothold.
It's a sobering thought and one that resonates with us even today. The Black Dahlia case, even after all these years, continues to fascinate, to horrify, to remind us that there are some mysteries that might never be fully solved.
That's the true legacy of this case. It's a testament to the enduring power of mystery, the allure of the unknown, and the limits of human understanding.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've examined the evidence, explored the theories, delved into the psychology of the killer. But as you said, some mysteries might never be fully solved.
And maybe that's okay. Perhaps the Black Dahlia case is meant to remain an enigma, a reminder that there are some things in this world that we'll just never fully comprehend.
I think you're right. It's a reminder that despite our best efforts, there will always be questions that go unanswered, stories that remain unfinished.
But that doesn't mean we should stop searching for answers. The Black Dahlia case, with all its complexities and contradictions, continues to challenge us, to make us think, to question our assumptions about the world and the darkness that resides within it.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this journey into the heart of one of America's most enduring mysteries.
And remember, the Black Dahlia case is more than just a true crime story. It's a glimpse into a specific time and place, a reflection of our cultural anxieties, and a reminder that some stories, even the most tragic ones, have the power to captivate us for generations to come.